Hey y'all, Rob Trepnow here, Trepnow Landscape. Got a candid moment while I'm driving. Talk about weeds and flower beds. Forgive me for not looking at the camera. Make sure I don't get in a wreck. So, our most popular service is lawn fertilization and weed control, which we are pretty good at eliminating weeds and flower beds and building healthy turf. But we get a lot of calls about eliminating weeds and flower beds. And we do provide a monthly as well as a quarterly service where we trim shrubs, we pull weeds, that kind of thing. But it's very important to understand the difference between weed control in beds and in lawns. In lawns, you generally have one big monoculture. You've got generally one species, maybe two, of grass that, if it's healthy, covers all of the dirt and provides a buffer between the sun and the dirt. Therefore, it's easier to control the weeds, except for in bare spots where the sun can reach directly to the dirt and then it magically makes weeds appear. Obviously, weeds can appear in thick turf, but not as likely. However, when it comes to flower beds, generally flower beds are made up of raised beds of good, healthy garden soil, and they're intermittently planted with shrubs. The denser that they're planted, generally, the less likely they are to grow weeds. And so you got a situation where generally 50, 60, 70% of the flower beds in a given flower bed are going to be exposed directly to the sun. What this means is that the sun comes down and, the shade underneath shrubs, oftentimes there won't be that many weeds. Sometimes there will be, but the open areas where the sun is able to hit the mulch and the soil, this is going to be like a breeding ground for weeds. It's just natural. If you don't want weeds in your flower beds, then what I suggest is paving your beds with concrete. And then you'll still have to spray them occasionally with Roundup. But the thing is, there's no way to eliminate and keep weeds out of your flower beds consistently. It's not possible. There's no pre-emergent that will eliminate and keep weeds out forever. Even the best pre-emergents perfectly applied in flower beds once a quarter, you're still gonna have weeds that show up in between. We live in a tropical climate or a semi-tropical climate, getting 60, 70, 80 inches of rain a year. We have sunshine every day. It's a weed breeding environment is what we live in. And so there's no quick fixes. There's no easy way out of it. And there are certain weeds which are not affected at all by pre-emergence in any way capacity. So pre-emergents are really not, they are very helpful when it comes to in the lawns. They're not super helpful when it comes to flower beds. They help a little bit if timed perfectly and done frequently. But just once putting out preen in the spring, guys, you're wasting your time. I'm serious. It honestly does not move the needle. Maybe it's going to reduce weeds by 5%, which is not even noticeable. So the key to flower bed weed control, and by the way, it's not the weed fabric, so don't waste your money on that either. That actually doesn't help. Most of your weed seeds are blown in by the wind, and so, you see weeds grow in a parking lot. Weeds are going to grow on top of your weed seed, your fabric. So don't waste your money on weed fabric. That's really kind of an old wives' tale. Newspaper. That doesn't really make a big difference. It may work for a month. So there's no quick fix. Having beds that are not overly irrigated, that drain well, having a thick layer of mulch, and then getting in there regularly and servicing your flower beds. Now, here's your options when it comes to getting rid of the weeds when you see them. First of all, there's obviously chemical control, right? Now, as a company, we don't actually use Roundup, the product. We just don't, for multiple reasons. We use a much more expensive, safer product called Finale. But by all means, if Roundup doesn't bother you, hey, use Roundup. That's fine with me. But when you see weeds, you can basically either pull them or you can spray them. Now, what we recommend is, hey, pull the big weeds, and then if you are down for spraying, the little tiny weeds that are kind of a pain to reach, bend over, and get, spray those with Roundup, with Finale, with several different products. That's fine. If you want to go the more organic route, you can get a little garden blowtorch. You can get them on Amazon for like $40. Here's a picture of one. You can burn the weeds. Now, the cool thing about that is you don't have to bend over, and it burns them. It's kind of satisfying, but it only lasts about 5 days, and they're gonna come back. So just keep that in mind. These are just a few tricks. This is what I do in my yard. Actually, my wife won't let us use Roundup in our yard. Not that we use it anyway, but we burn our weeds, and we just have to do it every few days. Now, one thing to keep in mind, there are a few weeds that are immune to even Roundup, which sounds pretty crazy. That sounds like a mutant weed, because it is. We've talked about nutgrass or nutsedge before. Here's some pictures of it. Roundup doesn't really affect this stuff unless it's like 1 day old. So here you got to bring out the big guns. You can use Sedgehammer or Certainty or a variety of products. You're gonna have to treat it multiple times. You have to stay on top of it. The beautiful thing about it is those products don't actually kill your other plants. And so if you mix it correctly, you can spray it on the top of roses and stuff like that, and it'll just kill the nutsedge. But you know, you gotta be careful about that. And I don't particularly recommend it unless you feel really good about your mixing. So what I'm trying to say here is it takes a really strategic approach to keep the weeds out of your flower beds. Whether you're doing it yourself or you're having someone do it for you, weeds are gonna show up every few weeks in Louisiana, pretty much year round, especially in between April and October. They're gonna be weeds. It's inevitable. There's no way around it. But cutting back your irrigation, so let's say you have a weed such as dollarweed, or especially a lot of nutgrass, generally those like wet areas, especially dollarweed. If you see a lot of dollarweed, cut that irrigation back or improve your drainage. That's probably gonna help. So that's kind of a cultural control where you're changing the culture so that you can improve the weeds. So, but yeah, chemicals, I mean, you can use Roundup, you can use Finale, but don't lean much on pre-emergence. No matter what they are, they're not gonna make a huge difference. They're gonna make a small difference if you do them just right. But most of you may not know exactly that timing and that quantity, and so it's hard to do. So anyway, these are just a few quick tips on flower bed weed control, but just keep in mind, there's no quick fix. It's not easy. You have to stay on top of it, and it's just guaranteed. If you live in the state of Louisiana, you're gonna have weeds, and you're gonna have to deal with them all the time. So sorry for this little bit disturbing public service announcement, but weeds are here, and they're not going anywhere. All right, guys, good luck.